Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you, Fargo? You can. In the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the
it.
writing is sort of everything, right? Like you kind of can fix plot holes, but if the writing is
so some readers love that, and some readers are like, "But I wanted more of this." So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. On today's episode, I am joined by a young adult fiction writer who has had over 50 short stories published across multiple countries, and now also a novel. It's Sue H. Cunningham. Hi, welcome.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me.
Thanks for coming on. So as of recording this now, your debut novel, Totally Deceased, has been out for almost a week.
Yes.
How does it feel having it out there in the world, knowing that all these people are reading it?
It's really weird. To be honest, it's been a bit of a mad weekend, so I've not had a great deal of time to process, but it's just starting to calm down a little bit now. So it's sort of a bit scary, but a bit lovely as well to think that people are reading it who don't actually know me, and starting to get early reviews back, which is again very odd. People that writing reviews that don't actually know me and haven't seen the book from early days. So
yeah, you've had a number of like over 50 short stories published. Does that make it a bit easier, do you think? Because you've had that experience of other people reading your stuff.
I don't know. It's quite anonymous, really. I used to write short fiction for what they call women's magazines or WOMAGs. And that's quite a while ago since I was doing that. And, you know, there are lots of different markets for short story fiction, or there used to be. It's become really reduced now, the market for short stories. A lot of magazines just carry celebrity storylines instead. You don't have as much short fiction. But for a little while, it was a really sort of cute thing to do. And I used to do it when my kids were little, and it was probably not as time consuming as trying to write a whole novel when you've not got very much time. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. And yes, I used to sell to the UK and to magazines in Australia. And very weirdly, there's a magazine in Sweden called Alas, which buys a lot of English fiction and translates it, which is, you think they have a lot of great writers in, Scandinavian countries, but they do translate a lot of English fiction. So
that's cool.
Quite interesting. Yeah. So you could sell it to one country and then sell it again somewhere else.
Oh, that's very interesting. I didn't know that. So getting back to the novel itself, Totally Deceased, murder, mystery, comedy. Tell us a little bit about it.
So it is, it's a funny sort of supernatural YA murder mystery. 17-year-old Jess wakes from an emergency heart transplant to find that she's being haunted by the ghost of her donor, who is a sort of high maintenance trust fund socialite who's convinced that she was murdered, and she refuses to rest in peace until Jess agrees to help solve the mystery behind her untimely death.
It sounds great. I was thinking, we just mentioned the short stories. Was this your first run at doing a novel, doing a long form narrative?
No. I wrote quite a bad sort of triplet rom-com, which was a bit cathartic, which, I really enjoyed writing, and I got some feedback on that. So they said it's really lovely, but this character has no character arc whatsoever. And it was sort of a series of funny anecdotes, I think, that I just sort of strung together for my own life. But no sort of really overarching sort of plot or character arc. So it was fun to write, but it wasn't ever going to go anywhere. And then I've written a couple of young adult books before this one. So yeah, this is the third young adult book that I've written, but the first to be published.
Oh, okay. When you talk about, and this is a common mistake that a lot of people, I think the first the first novel that I ever wrote, like had insane like character development and things like that, where it was like non-existent or like too much and it just didn't make any sense. But I wonder if, as someone who had a lot of experience writing short stories, where you don't necessarily need to go through a whole arc, there's a lot more freedom to sort of leave things open-ended. Was that something that you kind of learned moving from short form into long form?
I don't know, actually, because I think in a short story, you still have to have a beginning and a middle and an end. And I think the thing about short stories is the magazines make you write to a very strict word count. So it's really good practice, I think, for writing concisely. Some of the magazines just have a one-page fiction, so it would be like 600, 650 words. Some of them, it might be like 2,000 words, but because of the way the magazines are formatted, you couldn't send in a story that was, say, 1,600 words.
Yeah.
You know, you'd have to send in, it would either have to be a 650 one-pager or a 2,000 words or all the magazines have got their own house style and their own, so it's quite good practice really at sort of getting you to almost write to a remit and to be concise, because you've got to get it all in there. So I think when I started writing longer fiction, I probably learnt to cut a lot of the padding. So I tend to write, and then rather than cutting when I'm editing, I tend to add and embellish. So I have quite a tight first draft with not as much detail in it, and then you can, sort of have a bit of room to play around and add. So when I first submitted this story, I think it was about Totally Deceased. I think it was about 55, 56k, and we, over the editing period, I did another 10,000 words. So it's nice to have the freedom to do that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for what do people call additive editing? I think because there's almost like a positive connotation with it, as opposed to, I have to choose the thing that I have to like trim. Yeah, exactly. That's really interesting. And was this Totally Deceased? Because you won Right Mentor's 2020 Novel Award and you were longlisted for Baths in the same year. Was that with Totally Deceased?
No, that was another book called 49 Sisters, which was a kind of, again, it was a sort of magical realism, supernatural, but it was about kind of modern witches.
Okay.
It was really nice because I had quite a lot of interest with that, but we were just going into the pandemic. So it was, and YA wasn't doing very well at the time. And it was, I think it was just not the right time really. And it sort of did the rounds a little bit. And I got quite a few full requests for that manuscript, but it just wasn't going to go anywhere. And in the end, I just had to put it on one side and say, right, I'm going to have to write something new. And that's when I started writing Totally Deceased, which I wrote over the next year. And it was from an idea that I'd had for a previous novel, but I completely kind of rehashed it and edited it. And then that went out, trying to think when it was. Must have been 2021. And
sounds about right for the timeline.
And I was shortlisted for Northern Writers with this book. And then I was very lucky to be chosen for the Scooby Undiscovered Voices anthology.
Ah, okay.
So Totally Deceased went into the anthology, the 2022 anthology.
And is that how you got in contact with Rachel Petty, who is now your literary agent?
It isn't, but it's how my eventual editor, Yasmin Morrissey, saw the book, because she was one of the judges on the Undiscovered Voices anthology. So there were 12 writers chosen for the anthology, and they're all really lovely, talented people. So it was really, really lovely to be chosen for that. And because there is normally an agent party in February, and because of COVID, it was cancelled. Although the UK was pretty much open up by that time, I think, because Scooby is ultimately the US
based,
and they were, really taking the pandemic very, very seriously, still understandably, and they just didn't want the agent party to go ahead. So that was all done virtually, and did get quite a bit of interest when the anthology went out from agents and publishers. But it was one of those things that was sort of like, it was really lovely to have a lot of interest in it, but I still had a kind of wish list of agents that I wanted to send it to, that perhaps hadn't seen the anthology. So I did some cold submissions as well. So slush pile. And that's how I got my agent, Rachel Petty, who is absolutely wonderful. And she'd only just started agenting, so I was really lucky with the timing because you might know she used to be editorial director at Macmillan Children's.
Yeah.
And then she sort of swapped sides and started, I think it was only March last year. So I was probably one of her earliest submissions.
Oh.
I'm very lucky because she didn't have a huge backlog. Yeah. So she got back to me really, really quickly. And yeah, it was really lovely time because I had quite a bit of interest, and it was lovely after all these years to be in a position of being able to have a choice and be able to talk to different agents. And Rachel was definitely the right choice for me. She's brilliant.
Yeah, because it's a huge decision, because it's, in many ways, it's such a close relationship that it sort of goes beyond the sort of mechanics and the business aspect of it. I think it's very important that authors and agents do have like a friendly relationship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you've got to see eye to eye, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Rachel's really down to earth, really professional, really laid back, and she's just, I just had a chat to her and I felt really at home with her. And then we did a little bit of work on the manuscript together, and she had a great idea for an edit, which we implemented. And then because Yasmin Morrissey from Scholastic had already seen the manuscript, she'd seen the opening chapters, and she actually got in touch and said, when it's ready, I'd love to have it on submission.
Oh, wow.
But Scholastic only take agented submissions. At the time, I didn't have an agent. So I said, well, I've not got an agent yet. And, she said, well, let me know when you have. So of course I spoke with Rachel and said, Yasmin is already interested. And it did go out widely, but we had an early offer from Scholastic within the week. So it was just like so lucky, really amazingly lucky, because I'm not very good at waiting. I'm very instant gratification girl. So it was really good to have that, that early offer. It was brilliant.
Yeah, that's amazing, because I know that a lot of authors can really, and it can really start affecting your kind of mental health when you're in that. Because obviously, once you've spent lots of time submitting to agents, you have an agent, and then there's this sort of part of it where now the agent is going to take your work and they're going to go to the publishers and the editors, but you don't, as the author, don't really have any interaction. You don't have any kind of other than asking your agent, you don't really have any idea how that's going, and half the time the agent doesn't know how that's going because the editors are so busy, and it can be a long time. So it's amazing that it was really quick for you.
It really was. Yeah, it was. I was very, very lucky.
So as we mentioned, the kind of way these things work, you sign with the agent, then the agent takes your book out on submission. It was very quick for you, which is amazing. Then once you've agreed to sign, you're now with an editor. Yeah, I mean, you were in a wonderful position where you'd sort of already had an interaction with Yasmin, and so that was that must have been a pretty smooth transition, sort of meeting her and then immediately getting on with the work. How did you find the editorial stuff?
Hello, Saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
Steps.
Yeah, really good. It was lovely actually, because I felt like we were on the same page, and because I've always had sort of critique partners, and I've always kind of sent my work out to people, and you kind of get used to getting feedback, and there was nothing sort of deal breakery about it at all. I sort of in a debut group at the moment, so I hear lots of people talking about how they're asked to make quite big changes, or lose a character or add a character, or change the ending, or take a huge chunk out, add a big chunk in. The editing was all very kind of mutual and very quite, if I say an easy process, it was, it wasn't sort of as scary as I thought it was going to be. The hardest part really was that when the book was just sort of at the final editing stage, is that Yasmin actually sort of left Scholastic to work with Simon and Schuster because she was promoted, and so she's moved on. And I know this happened. So that was like, oh my gosh, she's gone somewhere else. And I have a new editor, Julia Sanderson, who is absolutely lovely from Scholastic. All the team at Scholastic are so lovely. But that was probably the biggest trip really in the whole thing, is that she wasn't going to be with me right until the very end, until the book was published.
Yeah. But
she has continued to support me. She's been really lovely and stayed in touch. And the rest of the team at Scholastic have sort of picked me up and carried on with me. And it was made the transition very, very smooth. But I think this is something that you realise you have to get used to, because the staff do move around, and they do get promoted and move elsewhere. And, this is part of the normal process. So
sure.
So it's something you're perhaps not expecting.
And Rachel is a perfect example. Like it's not uncommon that a lot of people who editors, people that work in editorial, do become agents. That's like a pretty normal path now for literary agents. Yeah, and she's great at it. And that was one of the things that really appealed to me, was that she had that, editorial background, because I love input. I'm very open to input, and I'm not overly precious. I don't think about my writing. I like to get ideas and input from as many people as possible. I've always had lots of critique partners, and I'm quite greedy, so I would say as many people as possible help, and I like to feedback on other people's work as well. And I think that, hopefully it does make you a better editor of your own writing to do that for other people. I think it definitely does. I think giving feedback, in my experience, sort of opens up a level of self-awareness to your own writing. When you see someone, because when you read your own writing, you don't see a lot of, if you do like a repetitive mistake, but if you see that same mistake with someone else's writing, then you go back to yours and you think, oh, wow.
I've just done exactly the same thing that I've just told that person not to do.
Yeah.
It's like writing your own synopsis though, isn't it? It's like, so hard. And if I look at somebody else's synopsis, I'm like, yeah, I can just tweak that for you, and I can make that a bit tighter.
Yeah.
And we just cut this bit and this bit. And if it's your own, it's like, oh no, you can't leave that bit out, and that bit's really important. And perhaps it isn't. So it's nice to have input.
Yes, no, it's great. And it's also a sort of, I think it's a really important skill that you almost like practice. Like you practice not just giving critique and receiving critique, but also just knowing when to trust yourself versus when to trust like different things that are kind of thrown at you.
Absolutely.
And hopefully your editor and you are on the same page. From what most of the time I hear, people are, or if they're not at first, they make the change, and then reading it back, they're like, oh no, this is great. This is really good.
I mean, there were sort of things that we changed, and I think it just made things tighter, really. All the suggestions that they made were just tweaking things and tightening things up, timelines, and just picking up things where you've been a bit lazy, or you've been a bit remiss, and sort of, would that really work in that timeline? My novel happens over quite a short period of time. And it's, I end up having to sort of write things out on a calendar of, if they've got a week to get from this place to this place, which train would they get, and probably it's overly researched, but then that it would actually work. And there was a problem at the beginning where I'd had something happen, and when we actually worked it out from starting the week on a Tuesday and then finishing the week on a Wednesday or whatever it was, and I'd had them doing something on a Sunday, which wouldn't have been possible, because that premises wouldn't have been open on a Sunday. So it's things that really, really people another eye on it, and looking out for things like that, where you've just been a bit sloppy maybe and not sort of tighten things up.
With those sort of details, that usually comes in the copy editing stage, right? So that wouldn't have been the primary editor, right? I guess if they spot it, they're going to flag it.
Yeah, I mean, there were probably bits and bobs all the way along, I would say. Yeah, I think the thing that Yasmin really helped me with was just that, to make sure, because although it's the first person narrative, and there are two main characters in the book, and it's just to make them really, really distinct, so that without putting a speech tag on, you knew who was speaking at any one time, because the two characters have such distinct voices, or I would hope that they have now. And that was really down to Yasmin really helping me with that, to making sure that we had a really clear, it's quite a dialogue heavy book, and that, you know, that it was very clear who was speaking at any one time. Because they're both teenage girls. So I'm not. So it was like trying to make sure that you're getting into that teen speak, but also giving them their own distinct speech patterns and making sure that it's clear whose voice it is. And I think that was something that I really, the editing really helped me with. Yeah. And I think it gives you skills, transferable skills that you think, right, next time I will do that.
And you'll do it from scratch. You'll do it from the start.
Yeah.
And they'll be the voices will be even more distinctive. I think that's an incredible skill. I read a lot of Joe Abercrombie, he's a fantasy author, and the way that he doesn't even need to tell you which character is speaking. Yeah. You just know it, like within like 3 words, you're like, oh, it's this character, because it's so like defined and things like that. It's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, that is what you really want to aim for.
Yeah, exactly. So you've been through the process now. The book's out. It's all been very exciting. Going into this, I'm just wondering, how much did you sort of know about publishing? How much did you know about all the different steps before you got into it?
Well, considering how long I'd been sort of doing the rounds of the slush pile, surprisingly little, really. I really, I knew that there were bigger edits and then sort of copy it. I think that the thing that surprised me was about the final edits. I just thought that was going to be sort of commas and typos and things like that. Yeah. And it's really not. And I think one of the things with children's publishing as well is a lot of sensitivity issues. You've got to be really careful with the language that you use. Which is
true of adult as well. It's just that, as you say, with children's and young adult is put into that children's bracket. It's sort of under a magnifying lens. There's much more scrutiny put on it.
Yeah, I think so.
And that actually brings us to towards the final question of the episode, which, as always, is, Sue, if you were stranded on a desert island with a single book, which book would you want it to be? Well, it sounds very literary, but it would be a Jane Austen, and it would be Emma. It's my real comfort read book. I do love to read books again and again if it's something that makes me feel happy and makes me feel comforted. I am a big rereader of books, and when my children were little babies, I probably didn't read a new book for about a year. I just used to reread stuff that I was familiar with, because I didn't have to work too hard to read. And if I was tired or, the kids were poorly, I could just read 10 minutes, pick it up and know where I was up to and put it back down again. Yeah. And I have a few of these comfort books. But I love Jane Austen, and Emma's probably my favourite because I just think it's really funny. I think her writing's really visual. It's just very witty. She makes a great joke about gruel, which it still makes me laugh every time I read it. I've read it so many times. And what's really funny about this book is that one of my favourite comfort films is Clueless, which is a retelling of Emma. And I probably didn't even realise until about the 3rd time that I'd watched it. I didn't realise. Yeah, it's like even one of the characters has got the same name as in the Jane Austen book, and it's obviously updated and modified. And it was in that era in the 90s when they were doing a lot of kind of Shakespeare retellings and classic retellings. But I absolutely love Clueless, and I think it's really funny. And I didn't actually realise until I'd watched it for about the 3rd time that it was actually Emma, which is my favourite book. So that's the book I would take. So I'd want a comfort read. I don't think I'd do very well on a desert island on my own. So I'd want something to comfort me and and it's a really long book as well. I love a chunky book. I'm a fast reader. So and I think she probably wouldn't get away with that these days. She would have been edited down, which would have been a real shame. Yeah. There's some older books where I think, oh no, maybe they could use a sort of modern treatment, but then there's somewhere I'm like, no, there's a real beauty in the kind of taking the time to write something out and describe something and stuff. Yeah. But Jane Austen's great. Jane Austen, very popular pick on the podcast, I think. Is it? But it's because the writing is just so relatable, to so many people. It kind of transcends so many barriers. Well, her dialogue is so good, and I just think,
considering she had to write everything by hand, and I will sit there with a laptop deleting one word and like going, oh, if I just put this sentence before that sentence, that sounds funnier if I do it that way.
Yeah.
And I think my book is intended to be funny, and I think that comes out in the editing. I've come back and think, oh, that would be funnier if I did it that way around, or if I added this kind of humorous theme throughout. And I think she had to write everything by hand. And how many times did she write and rewrite, before she got them right?
Yeah. I mean, just drafting it the second time seems like so much work.
You just think, oh, can't we put, my, she didn't even have a fountain pen. She'd be using a feather or whatever. And just thinking, here we go again. How much paper have we got? Everything would have been very expensive. And, I just think it's an amazing skill. I think she must have been just very good from the off. Yes. And I know she did edit and re-edit things and change the names of things. And, but I think considering, everything she had to do in her life and, her short life, to produce that body of work is amazing. Yeah.
Because it's all of her books are just brilliant as well. It's all killer, no filler.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. A great choice. We love a bit of Austen here on the podcast. And thank you so much, Sue. It's been really awesome chatting with you and hearing all about your experiences in publishing and the new book, Totally Deceased, which is out right now. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
And for anyone listening, if you want to make sure that you keep up with everything that Sue is doing, you can follow her on Twitter or X at Susie Writes, or on Instagram and TikTok at Sue H. Cunningham. To make sure you don't miss an episode of this podcast, follow along on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. You can support the show on Patreon, and for more bookish chat, check out my other podcast, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again to Sue, and thanks to everyone listening. We'll catch you on the next episode.
Fargo, the new virtual assistant from Wells Fargo, makes banking faster and easier. Like this.
Fargo, what's my checking account routing number?
And this.
Fargo, turn off my debit card.
And this.
Fargo, what did I spend on groceries last month?
And that's just the beginning. Do you, Fargo? You can. In the Wells Fargo mobile app. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/getfargo.
Terms and conditions apply. Your mobile carrier's availability and message and data rates may apply. Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.